All right, today we're diving into something you can't see, an invisible battlefield. It's got no borders, no front lines, but it's exactly where nations are fighting one of the most complex and honestly, most important conflicts of our time, state-sponsored cyber warfare.
So that brings us to the big question, right? It's something governments and military strategists are trying to figure out as we speak. In a world where a keyboard can be just as powerful as a missile, when does a line of code actually become an act of war? Where do you draw that line?
And that's really the heart of the problem. In the digital world, all those traditional distinctions between peace and war, civilian and soldier, they get dangerously blurry. And these aren't just far-off government squabbles. They have real-world consequences that can impact everything from the power grid you rely on every day to the security of the company you work for.
So, to get our heads around this, here's what we're going to cover. We'll start with the invisible front line itself, then look at the digital rules of war, we'll decode the cyber battlefield, meet the state-sponsored hackers, and finally, trace the global ripple effects that touch all of us.
Okay, let's kick things off with that invisible front line. The single biggest challenge in this whole space is something called attribution. Basically, proving who's actually behind any given attack.
A perfect example is the campaign that targeted U.S. critical infrastructure, which was widely believed to have come from Iranian groups. But proving direct state involvement? Incredibly difficult. And that ambiguity, that fog of war, is a weapon in itself. It lets nations cause chaos and instability without ever leaving clear fingerprints.
Okay, so if you can't even prove who did it, how in the world do you establish any rules? Well, let's look at the international effort to do just that, to try and apply the traditional laws of war to this brand new digital domain.
The biggest effort here is something called the Tallinn Manual. Now, the key thing to know is that this isn't a treaty. It's an academic study, which means it's non-binding. No one is forced to follow it. But it's pretty much the most authoritative guide that nations are using to try and navigate all the legal gray areas of cyber conflict.
And wow, does this show you just how fast the game is changing? You know, the first version of the manual, way back in 2013, was mostly focused on cyber attacks that look kind of like traditional warfare. But today, they're grappling with totally new stuff, like AI-driven attacks and the future threat of quantum computing just shattering our current encryption. The rulebook is literally being rewritten by technology in real time. So to fight back against these evolving threats, nations can't just be thinking about lines of code. They have to see cyberspace for what it is, a structured, operational environment with distinct layers that are all connected. So what are these dimensions? First, you've got command and control. Think of this as the strategic brain, the digital nervous system that coordinates everything. Second is the human dimension. This is all about influencing people, supporters, opponents, everyone in between through things like social media. And third is the physical dimension, the actual hardware we all depend on, from the power grid and data centers to satellites in orbit.
And this is where it all comes together. This is the key. These three dimensions aren't separate things. A successful cyber defense, whether for a whole country or even just a single company, requires synergy. You have to understand how they all overlap and affect each other. An attack on the physical grid, for example, is designed to cause chaos in the human dimension, and it's all orchestrated through command and control.
All right, we've mapped out the battlefield. Now let's talk about the elite soldiers who fight on it. And it's time to throw out that old stereotype of some lone hacker in a dark basement. The reality is, well, it's far more organized and way more sophisticated.
In the world of cybersecurity, these groups are called Advanced Persistent Threats, or APTs. And honestly, the name tells you everything you need to know. They are advanced in their skills, they are persistent in how they attack, and they are a major threat to national security. And the crucial part? They're backed by the full resources and strategic goals of a nation-state.
And when you put them side by side with your typical cybercriminal, the difference is just night and day. A regular cybercriminal wants money, and they want it fast. They operate on a timeline of days or weeks. An APT, they're playing a completely different game. Their motive is strategic. We're talking espionage, intelligence gathering, or pure disruption. They aren't planning for days. They are planning for years. So when you add it all up, you see what makes these groups so tough to beat. They have that long-term persistence, often with government funding. They use incredibly sophisticated, custom-built tools that you can't just buy on the dark web. And maybe most importantly, they operate with a powerful conviction that's tied to their national interests. For them, this isn't just a job, it's a mission.
So we have this invisible war, fought by these elite, state-sponsored teams.
What does any of this actually mean for us in our daily lives? Well, that brings us to the global ripple effect.
Think of it like a chain reaction. When a nation's critical infrastructure gets hit, the state has to pay to defend it, and then pay to recover. And that cost, it doesn't just disappear into thin air. It gets passed down, trickling through the economy, affecting private companies, and eventually, the people. You and me.
And that leads to this pretty mind-blowing idea, which comes from inside the intelligence world itself. It's the suggestion that some of the major global events we experience, things we think of as normal economic crises, could actually be the fallout from massive cyber attacks that happen completely in secret.
And that's really the question I want to leave you with. In a world where entire battles can be won or lost without a single shot ever being fired, how many of the headlines we read today are just the aftershocks of a cyber war we never even knew was happening? If you found this deep dive valuable, hitting that subscribe and like button really helps us continue making more explainers just like this one. Thanks for watching.